Mr. Peyton, you testified that Mrs. Cord has been in your employ for some 30 years. Is that correct?
Yes.
In what capacity has she served you?
I retained Mrs. Cord first as my housekeeper.
Is that the only role she's played for you?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'll answer that, Your Honor, though it is a rather insolent question for a son to ask about his own mother. Mrs. Cord is a very intelligent, capable woman. Since those first years, I've made her my personal secretary and my confidant. Put her in charge of my private and personal affairs.
I wonder if you'll be as willing to answer this, Mr. Peyton. Under what conditions did Mrs. Cord first become your employee?
Irrelevant and immaterial, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I have cause to believe the relationship between the witness and Mrs. Hannah Cord bears a direct relevancy on the cause of death. I intend to tie the two together before I'm through. But for the moment, I'll withdraw the question. Now, Mr. Peyton, you testified that Mrs. Cord served you as a, quote, dependable, reliable employee, unquote.
That's correct.
One you could depend on, one you could rely on.
Really, Stephen, house-splitting does not become you.
You also testified to the effect that Mrs. Cord has a, quote, stable character.
You haven't forgotten anything, have you, Stephen?
Not for 28 years.
Except perhaps where we are right now.
Mr. Peyton, this court is fully aware of the peculiar relationship that exists between the witness and counsel for the defense. But please, gentlemen, confine yourselves to the matters of interest to this court.
Yes, Your Honor. Stephen, would you like someone to read your last comment back to you? Or whatever they do here?
Mr. Peyton.
I am sorry, Your Honor. I was just thinking that when I put this boy through law school, I was hoping he'd come out with a little more poise, a little more professional manner about him. But I believe you were asking me about your mother's character.
You said she was stable. Didn't you mean rigid?
Stephen, you grew up at my knee. You know that I never select a word unless I'm sure it's most appropriate. I meant stable.
In the 30 years Mrs. Cord has been in your employ, had you ever seen her break into a violent rage?
Oh, no.
Have you ever seen her laugh convulsively?
No.
Weep profusely?
Are you trying to trap me into a contradiction? Would you like to suggest that I didn't see the reunion between Mrs. Cord and Ann Howard? That I didn't see them weeping?
Then they were crying.
That's what I said.
You said eyes were red, handkerchiefs were wet, the rug was damp with maudlin tears of mother and daughter. There'd been tears, lots of tears.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
All this from a woman you described as stable? From a woman you've never seen run the full gamut of emotions in the 30 years you've lived in the same house with her? Wouldn't you say, Mr. Peyton, that if Hannah Cord was moved to tears, quote, lots of tears, if she was standing on, quote, a rug that was damp with tears, that this was a highly traumatic moment, maybe even the most disturbing moment in her entire life, and the life of her daughter, Ann Howard?
You always tended to make a mountain out of a molehill, Stephen.
And you've always minimized the importance of anything you didn't want inspected.
Gentlemen.
We're going to inspect this, Mr. Peyton. We're going to inspect all of it.
Don't you mean wash it, Stephen? And then hang it out in the middle of the square to dry?
Gentlemen, Mr. Cord, if you continue this unprofessional conduct, I shall be forced to find you in contempt.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Your Honor, if counsel for the defense would like a recess.
I'm all right, Counselor. Thank you. You testify that on the day of this reunion of mother and daughter, the day Ann died, she'd come to your house to see Mrs. Cord. Is that right?
Yes.
How did you know that was her purpose?
Mrs. Cord told me.
When?
After Ann Howard had gone.
Then you didn't talk to Ann.
No.
But you sat there and testified, quote, that in your opinion, Ann was not emotionally disturbed. Well, if you had no communication with her at all, what were you basing your opinion on?
On what I saw.
On what you saw? Well, you just impressed on me the fact that you always select the most appropriate word to describe something, Mr. Peyton. Now, why is it you use the word saw and not heard?
Well,
Exactly. How much of the conversation did you hear between Mrs. Cord and Ann Howard?
well, enough to know that it was nothing more than two hysterical women enjoying an hysterical reunion.
Did you say hysterical?
And it was a figure of speech.
Again, a figure of speech you selected, Mr. Peyton. Does that accurately describe the encounter between Ann Howard and Mrs. Cord?
Not as well as it describes your conduct in this court.
Where were you when the two women began their conversation?
In my room.
On the second floor, on the opposite side of the house?
Now, surely you haven't forgotten where my room is, Stephen. You used to come up with a newspaper every evening when you were a little lad, don't you remember?
On the opposite side of the house, up a flight of stairs while they were talking.
Most of the time, yes.
Where else were you?
In the entry hall.
Coming down the stairs?
Well, Stephen, you were the only person who ever used the banister.
Is this all so funny to you, Mr. Peyton? Is it all some kind of elaborate joke? My sister's dead. A sister I didn't even know till the day she died. Because you kept us apart all of our lives. And now the state is considering taking another man's life away from him. And you sit there like this is some kind of business routine.
Mr. Cord, I have warned you of the consequences if you cannot control your emotions.
Your Honor, I am trying to establish the possibility of someone other than the defendant being responsible for Ann Howard's death. Someone in this man's house. Now, I believe that Ann was driven to take her own life, and I don't see anything humorous in the matter.
What more does he want, Your Honor? I've already testified that, in my opinion, that confrontation between Mrs. Cord and Ann Howard was of relatively minor importance.
Relative to what, Mr. Peyton? The monumental lie you made her live all her life? The cruelty you inflicted on her? Because you never allowed her to know the truth?
Your Honor, I object. The witness is not on trial here.
He should be. That reunion of minor importance was the trigger that caused Ann to take her own life. He put a loaded gun in her hand the day she was born. The day he and my mother sent her from his house to grow up believing a lie, just like the one I had to believe all those years.
Mr. Cord!
We never knew anything but lies. Even now in a
Bailiff.
court of law, he lies.
Mr. Cord!
You never told the truth, even when you knew it. If you told Ann the truth, she wouldn't be dead now.
You don't care if your sister's dead. It's all a masquerade, Stephen.
Mr. Peyton!
If you cared, you'd never have touched this case with a 10-foot pole.
You have no soul.
Soul? What a word for you to use. You're defending the man who murdered your own sister.
I didn't murder anybody.
Where is your soul?
Sit down, Mr. Weber! Mr. Cord, you have had sufficient warning. I hereby fine you in contempt of court and fine you the sum of $500. You will come to my chambers immediately. Mr. Peyton, you may step down. This session is now adjourned.
To the judge's chambers, Mr. Cord.
Hello, Mrs. Healy.
Hello, Rachel. How are you today?
Fine.
Now, what haven't you read? We don't have much choice here.
I haven't read any novels.
Hello, Rachel, honey.
I brought you some chocolate caramels.
No visitors are allowed in here.
I'm Mr. Chandler, Rachel's uncle.
But there were instructions left at the desk that she was to have no visitors.
I'm a relative.
No visitors means no visitors.
Oh, I see. I'm awful sorry.
What did they tell you at the desk?
Well, they told me where I could get a box of chocolate caramels. Rachel loves caramels.
Who gave you permission to come up here?
I don't want to get anyone in any trouble.
Mr. Chandler, did a nurse give you this room number?
A girl in uniform helped me.
Miss Cho, please. Well, it's important that I talk to her. It's urgent. No, I'll wait.
2 pounds of chocolate caramels.
I don't want any.
Oh, come on now. Don't give me that.
Mr. Chandler, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the room until I get some instructions.
Look, just tell her all I want is 5 minutes with my niece.
Yes, yes, I'm still here.
I'm not going to punish you for running away. You got nothing to be afraid of. I fixed up things around home so you'll be happy there.
How do you mean, fix things up?
I went up to Maine to get my sister. She's going to be living with us now, taking care of the house and things.
You brought Aunt Meg down here just so they'll make me go
Miss
home
Choate.
with you. Well, you can't.
Mr. Chandler in
You're going
Rachel's
to like
room
her,
here.
Rachel. I know
He
you
claims
are.
he's her uncle.
I won't come.
Dr. Rossi, I have one of our volunteer ladies on the phone. Mr. Chandler is in Rachel's room.
Can't you understand? The three of us are going to get along real fine together, like a family should. Now take this, please.
I'm free! Mr. Chandler! Mr. Chandler!
Get up! Get up! You take your hands off of me! What are you doing?
I'm the girl's uncle. I got a right to be in there.
I know who you are. You come with me.
Who are you, anyway?
I'm her doctor, that's who I am. Now, what were you doing in that room?
Dr. Rossi?
That's right.
Well, I'm her guardian, Dr. Rossi. Maybe you didn't know that. Your no visitors doesn't apply to me.
That sign applies to everyone.
What for? She don't look that sick.
Well, I'll decide whether or not she's sick, and whether or not she'll have visitors, and who those visitors will be. Do I make myself clear, Mr. Chandler?
Crystal clear.
Well, the next time you call, the nurses will notify you whether or not you'll be able to see your niece.
Well, as her guardian, at least I got a right to ask what's wrong with her, don't I?
She cut her hand.
She cut her hand.
That's right.
And she gets a room of her own in a hospital with nothing more serious than cutting her hand?
It happens to be quite serious, Mr. Chandler, emotionally, psychologically.
Look, doctor, I've cut my hand dozens of times, bailing.
She cut her hand deliberately when she heard she was going to be returned to your custody.
Rachel tells some fine tales, Doctor. Tales I don't expect you'd believe if she weren't so young and pretty. Now, how long do you think it'll take for that little cut to heal, Doctor?
I couldn't say.
Guess then.
I'll keep her here at the hospital as long as it's necessary. And during that period of time, you'll stay away from her. Is that crystal clear, Mr. Chandler? Because the next time, the nurses will have instructions to call the police.
Are you threatening me?
I'm just telling you the facts, Mr. Chandler. If you consider that a threat, that's your problem.
I'm her guardian. I'll get a court order.
No court will take her out of the hospital without a release from me.
I'll get another doctor.
You do that.
He'll examine her, say she's fit. You'll have to release her.
You do that, and I'll take you to court.
On what grounds?
On the grounds you're unfit to be her guardian.
You just try that, Doctor. You go ahead and try.